Today, I'm going to rank every Red Dead Redemption 2 supporting character in a tier list, starting from the worst supporting characters and going all the way up to the best supporting characters. 99% of my viewers are unsubscribed, so if you'd like to see more content like this, subscribe, as I'll be posting tier lists every single day. In last place, I've got to put Beau Gray. Beau Gray is kind of just annoying to me, and I don't really like him as a character at all. He kind of just makes Arthur his errand boy, and he really just wants to get with Penelope. I feel like there's not really much development here. Like, he is this nice guy compared to the rest of the Grays, and him and Penelope really have this Romeo and Juliet dynamic between them, but I don't really think he's that interesting as a character, and because Arthur's his errand boy and doesn't really get to know much about him besides he's kind of like this weak guy, and he's just like in love with Penelope, and he's very like forward about being progressive with women and all that. There's not really much that's going on with Beau, and I just don't like him as a character because he just makes Arthur his bitch. So I don't like that at all, and I have to put him in D tier. In 12th place, I've got Penelope Brathwaite. Kind of the same thing with Beau Gray, where they just kind of make Arthur their errand boy, and I don't really think she has that much development as a character. They just kind of are in love with each other. They run this Romeo and Juliet thing, and I'm not going to lie, whenever it hit the 6th chapter and their little mission came up, I would always skip it because I don't really like these guys. I don't really care about them enough to like actually want them to get together, even though both their families kind of suck to them, and they are, I don't know, kind of interesting characters. It's like the two good people and two bad families, but I don't think there's really much going on with them besides that, so I have to put her also in D tier with her lover. In 11th place, I've got Jamie Gillis. I think he's only in this one mission, but I feel like he's a big part of it, and I really like his and Arthur's brother-to-brother dynamic. I mean, they're not really brothers, but, you know, Arthur was dating his sister, so that was kind of interesting, and I don't know, I like Jamie, and I think it was wise that he leaves the Chelonians. It's also funny that he's like really defending the Chelonians and all that, but there's not really much interesting going on with Jamie. He's kind of just a regular character. He doesn't really do much. He's only in this one mission, so I'm going to have to put him in C tier, even though he is kind of cool for this one mission. In 10th place, I got David Gettys. He's a really nice owner of Pronghorn Ranch, and he's really carrying to John, I think. And I just think overall he helps John out a lot. You know, he helps him get back Abigail and buy Beecher's Hope and all that, but he doesn't really do anything else besides that. He also cheats on his wife. I think they kind of have an open relationship, though. So I don't know. It kind of works out well, but I think Gettys is kind of a boring character. And while he is a nice guy, he doesn't really do anything in the story, and he's just, I don't know, he kind of helps out John, but he doesn't do anything besides that. And there's no development with him at all. So I'm going to also have to put him in C tier. In 9th place, I have Archibald Downs. I think Archie is pretty cool in his own right. He's kind of mean to Arthur. He's someone that fights back against Arthur, but there's no development. Again, like Arthur does help him and his mom out, but he's always just kind of this angsty little teenager guy. And while that is cool and it's always nice to have someone that's going to fight back against Arthur, it's nothing enough to put him any higher than C tier, and I think his mom and his dad are definitely bigger and more important characters in the story, and he's just kind of an added along guy that I think is also pretty cool just because he's this angsty teenager that fights back against Arthur. In 8th place, I've got Hercule Fontaine. I think he's a pretty cool character. He's just like a generic revolutionary, but I do like everything he does, and he's fighting back against Fusar and all these bad people, and while there's not really much going on with him, he's a pretty cool and good fighter, and I don't know, I like his, you know, camaraderie with Dutch and Arthur and even Micah. Like they're all kind of nice to Hercule, and I think Hercule is also nice to them. They have kind of a working relationship where they both, you know, get what they want, and they both want to take out Fusar because Fusar is trying to hunt all of them. And I think it just works well, and while he's a pretty generic character, I do like how everything works together well with him, and he's just like this generic revolutionary. It's kind of based off like Che Guevara and all these other revolutionaries in this time, but he's pretty cool, so I'll have to put him in C tier. In 7th place, I've got Captain Monroe. I like Captain Monroe as a character, but he's just really set on exactly what he wants to do. He wants to help the Wapiti and the army to kind of get together, and they all got to be friends, but of course Colonel Favors doesn't like that, so it doesn't happen, and he eventually, you know, tries to get court-martialed and all that. But I think he's just a really generic character that has that really set moral standard, and while I think he's an interesting one, I don't really think there's much going on with him and enough to put him any higher than C tier, especially because he doesn't really change Arthur's views. Arthur's views are already getting changed by his talks with Rain Falls. So I think I also have to put him in C tier. In 6th place, I've got Mr. Thomas Downs. I don't think Thomas Downs is really that important of a character by himself, but of course him giving Arthur tuberculosis really is an important thing in the whole game, and it really changes Arthur's whole view on everything. So he has to be high up here. He's also a really nice guy, even though Arthur is really mean to him. Like, he's just trying to help out people, and he does fundraisers, and he tries to get donations. And I don't know. I think he's a really nice guy, and he really changes Arthur's view on everything. But he's also this pathetic guy who's, getting money from Strauss, and Arthur's just beating the shit out of him. So I think that's also like kind of funny because he's just like this really tiny guy, and he gives Arthur this debilitating disease and tuberculosis. So I'm gonna have to put him in B tier just because of how he changes Arthur's view on everything, but he's not really that important of a character in his own right. In 5th place, I've got Mary Linton. I think Mary is actually a lot better of a character than a lot of people say. Everyone hates her just because of what she did to Arthur, and she is, not a great person for that, but I think I understand her point of view. No one really wants to be married to an outlaw, and like Bessie with Hosea, he always tried to get out, but he could never leave the life, and Mary totally understands that. And well, I think Rockstar and all these people, they do understand that Mary's an unlikable character. She's not really a bad character in her own right, and I think the way she kind of changes Arthur, she turns him into a little bit softer of a man, and he always comes back to her even when she doesn't really do him right. I think she has to be a solid character, and I do like her as a character in a way just because she knows what she wants, and if Arthur won't change for her, she won't change for him. So I don't know. I think I have to put her in B tier just because she's an unbreakable character and just because how she like influences Arthur. In 3rd place, I've got Edith Downs. I think Edith is actually an amazing character. She turns from this wife of Thomas Downs and just kind of this farmer's wife to a prostitute, and then she eventually becomes a golf course owner, if you see in like the epilogue and all that. And she really just perseveres through it all, showing Archie you can do it all. And like, even though she's doing some bad things, like I don't think sex work in this time is the greatest and most amazing thing. I think it is great exactly what she does. She always wants to provide for her family. She always wants to do this thing. She's always going to put food on the table for Archie. I think that's why she's an amazing character. She also really changes Arthur's view on things. He always wants to help her, and he eventually does help her getting out of there. He always wants to get her away from sex work, and he eventually does. So I really like what she changes Arthur wise, and I really like just everything she does in this game. She's a really strong character, and just overall is a great character and influences Arthur a lot. So I'm gonna have to put her in B tier. In 3rd place, I have Eagle Flies. I love how explosive this guy is. He always wants to do these things that he thinks are good for the Wapiti tribe, and they're not almost ever good for the Wapiti tribe. Like, clearly he pushed them out of Canada, but he's a good friend to Arthur. He's a good friend to Charles, and while Dutch kind of does manipulate him, I just love how explosive he is as a character, and just how like interesting he is. Just him and his dad's dynamic and the contrast between the two of them, how they're just on opposite sides. One of them thinks they should fight back, and one of them thinks they should just kind of submit, and they're both kind of right in their own way, but one of them really gets manipulated by Dutch, and Eagle Fly is just such an interesting character in the ways that you can see how he easily gets influenced by Dutch, also this similar kind of personality type guy. And I just love how explosive of a character he is, and just how interesting his whole life is, and I just love the dynamic between him and his father, and just, I don't know, everything, how that works out. So I'm gonna have to put him in A tier, but at the very, very top of A tier. In 2nd place, I've got Sister Calderon. I think Sister Calderon has to be the best like stranger mission character you can do. There's a couple stranger missions you can do with her, and I just think she's such an interesting character in terms of how she changes Arthur and how she changes his perspective on everything. He just wants to, help everyone else out, and she really gives him the blueprint to that, where it's like, you just have to help these people out, just do something to help them. And, he does, and it really affects him for the rest of the game, because you see how he turns from this man who just wants to do something with the rest of his life to someone who wants to help everyone else with the rest of his life and give the rest of his life to all of his friends and family that he can help. So I just love her perspective on everything, and she just gives such a good, like, this conversation right here just really changes Arthur's perspective on life. And just like, even if you're a bad person, as long as you do something good to turn that around, it really can work well. And I think it works well just with her being a Christian or Catholic nun. And I think being a nun and doing all this, it really, I don't know, it's just so amazing because they can mix in these Catholic and Christian and just religious values into the game without it being super blatant and over the top about, oh, you got to be this Christian or Catholic person. It's like, just do something good. You can mix in these religious values into something that's not about religion. Like, Arthur isn't a religious guy at all, but he's helping the nun here, Mrs. Sister Calderon, and he also, like, they mix in these religious values where just like you just have to do something good to replace the bad things. And while I don't think that's really, how a lot of religions work, I think with like Catholicism, sometimes it's like you can literally buy the religion, but I think it's just like do something good to replace the bad things you've done in your life and just be a good person instead of being a bad person, and that'll all carry out, and you can maybe not go to heaven because Arthur always says he's going to hell, but Arthur is eventually just going to help everyone else around him get into a better place, and that will always reflect well on you in life, and people will always see you as that good person, not as that bad person. If you see in low honor versus high honor Arthur, you can see high honor, he's reflected as a much better character versus low honor. He's not reflected as that good of a character, but still people think he's a better character than some of these other people in the gang. And for that, Sister Calderon has to go in S tier, one of the best characters in the entire game. In first place, it has to be Rain's Fall. Rain's Fall, in my opinion, really changes Arthur's perspective the most. He's more of a major character than Sister Calderon. And while Sister Calderon might change Arthur's perspective a lot, I think Rain's Fall really gives him those first inklings of, oh, you can do something better and you don't have to do this thing that's always combative and just blowing stuff up and hurting other people. You can take the weaker route, and while it may seem weaker, it always can be a stronger route in some opinions. So I think Rain's Fall has to go in first place. He really shows Arthur this different side of him, and while he's just in the sixth chapter, I think he really plays a big role in here. He always tries to stop his son from doing all these things, but he can't, and he sees the downfall of his tribe happening, and he eventually moves them to Canada. And I think also his interactions with John at the end of the game, where you can meet him in the Annesburg train station. He comes down to see his son every year, and it's like his son understands that, the things he did were wrong, and eventually when he dies, he eventually comes back to see his son every single year, because even though he knows his son has done some bad things in his life, his son really killed himself, I guess, in a way, he still loves his son, and he loves what his son did while he was there. And I don't know, it's just so great. And you can see this like strong man in one way be a weak man in another way. Everyone perceives him as this weak man because he just lets the army roll over him, but he just wants to do what's best for his tribe, and he knows if his tribe fights back against the U.S. Army, they're of course going to get destroyed, and the U.S. Army is going to take every single chance they can to destroy the Wapiti tribe, so he eventually moves them into Canada. And I just think he's such a great character. He's so well fleshed out, and I think Rockstar did a great job with him, so I'm also going to have to put him in S tier, probably one of the best characters in the entire game. So that rounds out my entire Red Dead Redemption 2 supporting characters tier list. Let me know what you would change in the comments. I'll debate with you. I'll tell you why I thought one way or another. And if you do like content like this, please subscribe and like, and I'll be making videos like this very, very often.